Good afternoon, everybody. While we're waiting for the technique catching up, there's two bits of news coming from Europe right now related to the topic of democracy, I fear. A British MP was stabbed and died this afternoon in his constituency. At about the same time, a new German coalition seems to be in the making. It's called a traffic light coalition, combining socialist Greens and classical liberals. They have put forward their first note to form a cabinet, which should be ready by Christmas. One of the points they put in the note that was released today is that they want to make Citizens' Assembly a stronger feature of the functioning of Germany's parliamentary democracy. So if yesterday we were talking about Paris taking this on and turning it into a permanent institution, we now have the words fourth economy taking this on. I think this is incredible news. Say again? Mr. Ames, David Ames. He's a conservative. He was in his constituency and he was stabbed by a 25-year-old. Reasons are unknown, but he is in custody now. Okay, now this is the last session. It's been two pretty intense and tightly packed days with lots of information. Roger, you pulled together an incredible program. And in order to help you digest a little bit of the overload of ideas and information we got, let's go through some of the practices again. And this last session is really what the students at Bard College have been doing over the past couple of weeks. I was here as a Hannah Arendt Center and National Endowment for the Humanities visiting fellow, teaching a course that was called Beyond Elections, Revitalizing Democracy Through Citizens' Assemblies. And it was designed as a special workshop, a crash course on democratic innovation, 4 weeks, 4 hours per week. There were 12 students, most of them are here. They all came from different disciplines and backgrounds, and also from different stages of their academic career, from freshmen to seniors. The workshop addressed some of the theoretical, historical, and philosophical backgrounds, but I think the real extra was that we tried some practical, hands-on approach by working together with 3 local mayors and town supervisors. And it was thanks to the contacts Roger had bringing in, and thanks to one of the students, Monica Byrne, bringing in the mayor of Hudson, city where she is living. And so, on the basis of a historical understanding and the philosophical underpinnings of climate or citizens' assemblies, we undertook some exercises at designing these citizens' assemblies. Students sat together, thought some of the processes through, and also went to the places in person, in one case online, in order to flesh out the proposal they were going to work on. And this is what we'll be presenting here at this afternoon session. It was a bit what you could call applied Arendtian philosophy. It's learning about democracy while shaping it. And this is a picture I took during one of the last classes, where you saw the 12 students divided in groups of 3, each one of them working on one of the local municipalities or communities that we've been talking on. It was also a collective quest. I, as their lecturer, wasn't there with ready-made answers. I think the big mistake with electoral democracy has been that we thought that there was a unique formula, a sort of one-size-fits-all model that could be applied everywhere. Deliberative democracy, sortition-based democracy, I think it's a quest. It's a quest where even in the designing process, you learn from people in the room, but you also learn from people from local communities. And one group of my students has been to Hudson and talking just to people on the street on a certain number of these issues, so in order to improve the model that we're working on. The three local communities here on the Google map, in the north is Hudson, which is a city. Then there's Redduck, which is a town consisting of two villages, Redduck itself and Tivoli, and Pine Plains. And I now realize, especially after Tracy's talk, that the red star might have strange connotations given the previous talk on communist traditions in the US, but it's the place that indicates Bard College, without any connotation intended. The three local communities, there's Hudson, the place in the north, a city with over 6,000 inhabitants, and the mayor is Mr. Kamal Johnson. He is with us today. The second place we'll be talking about is Redduck, the one that is closest by. Actually, campus is on the grounds of the Redduck town. One town, two villages. Most of the participants tonight might have a meal in the place Tivoli. We're still in Redduck then. And the town supervisor is Robert McKeon. He planned to be here today, but he was regrettably no longer able to come in person. But if all goes well, he should join us through Zoom. And I'm looking at the technical staff to see whether that has been confirmed. He's not here yet. Okay. He'll join the session. I told him he would be on at 4 p.m., so we'll have some time. And then lastly, Pine Plains, which is more of a rural community with 2,400 inhabitants, and its town supervisor is Darrah, who is here with us today. This is a bit of a bucolic idea of Pine Plains. It does have a centrum as well, and we'll be talking about that centrum. But without further ado, I would first like to invite Mayor Johnson to come to the stage with me and have a first discussion on the city of Hudson. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us. Major Johnson, tell us a little bit about yourself. You have been a mayor of Hudson for about 2 years now?
Yeah, almost 2 years. So I was elected November of 2019. So I took office January 1st of 2020. I was the first African-American elected to office of mayor in the city of Hudson, and also the youngest as well.
How old were you?
I was 34 when I was elected. Yeah, and then...
and how old are you now, 2 years later?
36.
How has it been so far?
It's been interesting. I would say the first few months of my tenure, we ran into a global pandemic, and from then it's been constant having to maneuver and deal with crisis after crisis after crisis, on top of a city that a small city that had big city issues, that has big city issues.
Yeah, and before you became a elected politician, I understood you worked as an activist?
Yes, I've done, a lot of activist work. We've marched all over the county of Columbia County. I was a community member. My entire background has to do with working with young people and families. So a lot of the issues that were going on in our county and our city were very personal to me.
How do you mean personal?
I grew up, my mom was, on drugs for most of my childhood life, and, I'm one of 4 boys, and I'm the only one of those boys that has never been to prison.
Really?
So, a lot of things that I was seeing in our community around, drug use, homelessness, all of these things are things that I personally, experienced.
How does that affect your political life?
I would say I'm probably one of the more exciting politicians. But it makes things, it makes me work that much harder because I can relate directly to people's experiences. I came in at a time where, the nation was really at a standstill. There was a lot of civil unrest, COVID came in, and there was a lot of issues. So I think people really wanted a fresh face. They wanted, not the usual. And, I felt like I was all of those things.
You were there as a mayor when George Floyd got killed as well?
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that was, probably the only time in my tenure where I've been nervous, because there was riots all around us in the capital region. I actually was a part of a group that was protesting in one of the local towns in Kinderhook, and a gun was actually brandished on us. So a lot of people felt like enough was enough, and they wanted to do something. And there was a lot of fear, like we don't want people to protest in Hudson because they're going to destroy the city, or there could be outside agitators and things like that. So I was stuck with that activist side of me that's like, no, we need to be seen and heard, and also that political side that's like, if this happens and it gets bad, it's going to all fall on my shoulders. So I decided to get in front of it and, organize my own protest and be on the front lines to bring in our police commissioner, our police chief, and talk about changes that's going to happen and really involve the community. And I remember that morning I was like, at the end of the night today, I'm either going to be a genius or a complete idiot. And
what was it?
And it went well. It was really good. Like, people turned up, flooded the streets. We asked everybody to wear masks, and I put in kind of a mandate to say, like, this isn't an official thing, but we would like everybody to be indoors tonight at 9.
Right.
So we don't have any violence or anything like that. And this isn't something that we're going to police, but this is something that if you trust me as your mayor and you trust in the people that are speaking here today and each other, then you'll do it. And I actually went outside around 9:15 that night, and it was a ghost town, and I was just like, whew. And it was an amazing turnout and event as well.
How did your relations with the law enforcement develop since, or has it been affected after George Floyd's killing?
Yeah, I think, coming in, I ran on, one of my staples was police reform, and this was even before George Floyd's murder. And I kept saying, like, we need to change the culture of things in our police force. And whenever you talk about police reform, it's immediately met with criticism.
By the police themselves.
By the police, by citizens, anyone. It's just like, you're anti-police. If you want to reform something, you got to be anti it, which, isn't the truth. So I really had to build the relationship, which we're still doing, of trust to say, like, yes, things have to change, but also we want to change them from within. We want the police to be a part of this change. And, that's what, we've been able to have a lot of success with right now. But there's still, ways to go.
Right. Can you tell us something about the ethnic composition of your community? It's highly diverse, but what are the stats?
Yeah, it's majority white, so probably like 60%. We have probably 25, 30% African American. We have a growing Bangladesh community. They're probably within 7 to 10%. And, a small kind of Asian and Hispanic community. That's also, been growing over the past few years.
And what about your police corps?
Our police force.
How many cops do you have?
We have 26 officers, and about, I think, 2 are African American.
Is that not enough?
It depends on, the officers. I mean, we could have 10 African American officers, but if they don't buy into a new culture, then, it's no different. It's to them, it's all blue.
Is there a lot of tension? What do you mean to them, it's all blue?
You put on the uniform, you're behind the blue wall, and, there's a culture that, you follow.
Right. Is there a lot of tension between the community and the law enforcement?
I think there's tension, but also it's more of a mistrust. We've had some upticks of violence over the years in our city. We've had a situation where, 2 toddlers were shot, and, no one would come forward. and talk to police, and a lot of that has to do with, the culture of not speaking to police, not trusting police, feeling taken advantage of, and also seeing, family members or, whoever, people close to you arrested. And that's like part of the culture where I wanted to change, is because a lot of times what we see in our community, the first interaction with police officers is when your parent or sibling or whoever is being arrested. So even though they might have done something wrong, in your eyes, you're looking at that officer as, breaking up your family.
That's it, yeah. You came to our class, you spoke about the things that keep you up at night. The students were intrigued by this police community dynamics. They've been working on this, and you know this because they've come and visited your staff in Hudson. I think there's 4 of them. We have 4 seats here. I will invite them to the floor. I will move over there, and then at the end, I would invite you back on the floor to react on what they've been responding. But thank you for this introduction so far.
All right, no problem. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So may I now call the 4 students that have been working on Hudson. This is Meg, Sam, Emily, and Minchie. And please grab a seat. I'll be on the bar stool. Hi and welcome. It's actually the first time I see the students without their masks. So welcome. And Meg, the first question is perhaps for you. I remember when we started talking about this in class, you said this is such a sensitive topic. Why then did you choose to work on this one?
Well, considering the fact that this topic is sensitive, as is in the introduction of our report, the phrase defund the police, also Mayor Johnson touched on this, but the phrase defund the police is one of the most controversial and charged phrases in our current national dialogue. And it is sensitive in that people who don't want to address or acknowledge race issues or the role of police in our country will run for the hills to avoid it, as we saw when we went to the police station.
How was that?
Well, it was very brief and kind of stilted. They wouldn't talk to us. The one police officer we talked to said that because of his opinion, he didn't feel comfortable talking with us. But yeah, it is, for some Americans, it's sensitive in that way, but it is something that unfortunately plays a big and very real role in existence for African Americans. This distrust of police officers has always existed, it's not new. Police are agents of a system that's been the driving force of violence and some abolitionists say continued enslavement of Black Americans through the loophole in the 13th Amendment, which says that slavery is abolished except for in punishment of a crime. And it's widely known that our prison system is the biggest prison system in the world, and also we have the biggest prison population in the world, and 1 in every 4 African males will be imprisoned at least once in their lifetime. And 1 year in prison takes off 2 years of your life expectancy. So this mass incarceration is actually like lowering the life expectancy of Americans. So based on these, statistics alone give insight into how real this problem is for many of us, many Americans. And in this way, it's the sensitivity of the topic is different for different people. And I definitely feel like the portrayal of this as a sensitive topic has been a form of censorship in the past. and it has been a way of kind of suppressing the voices of African Americans for decades. And emotion does not deem the words of a person illegitimate. And I personally believe that it's time to stop coddling people who are afraid to address the issue in its entirety and give as much power as possible to the people who are most affected by this issue. And this is sort of a sentiment that I felt as we've done this Citizens Assembly, and I really think that this work is really important. So
Precisely because it is sensitive, we need to talk. Sam, you've been working as part of this group. To what extent do you think that a Citizens Assembly may be of help here?
Hello? Okay, good. This one works. So I think, just as Meg was saying, because of the sensitivity of the issue, and this goes back to something you said in class where you said that anger or sensitivity of an issue is not necessarily dangerous in itself, but rather a sign that there needs to be a conversation about an issue, that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. And I think because of the sensitivity and the anger that surrounds this issue, it more than warrants a Citizens Assembly to discuss it.
And how would it look like, your Citizens Assembly? How many people would you bring together?
So in our proposal, which Meg has over there, we propose a relatively small and intimate Citizens Assembly of around 30 people, with percentages specifically looking at race, economic status, age, and gender based on the population of Hudson, with some slight upticks in the representation of some of the minority communities, Black, Latino, Bangladeshi.
If this is a random sample, does that mean there's a good chance there will not be any police officer involved?
Yes, so to counter that, and especially given the fact that a very small percentage of the 26 police officers actually live in Hudson, to counter that we're hoping to
Because most of the 26 do not live in Hudson.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the chances are even smaller.
Exactly.
So you corrected for that?
Yeah, so to correct for that, we figured that we would get, hopefully, depending on willingness, of course, with the department and organization with the government, around 5 police officers, one to sit at each table, which would be about 6 people, so that they can be part of the conversation as well.
So you would have round tables
Yeah.
with regular citizens and police officers?
Exactly, so 30 regular citizens and then 5 police officers
Right.
added into that mix.
I got a question for you, Emily. If you have these police officers there, and how many days would you bring them together?
I believe we said it was once a month for 6 months, right?
So 6 Saturdays, basically. Yes. These police officers, would they have to come in uniform and battle dress?
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that came up when we were talking about this, and due to the sensitivity of the question, we think that a dress code should be implemented for this assembly, and that it would be recommended for the participants to wear formal wear or just casual clothes. And we specifically request that the police officers participating in the assembly do not wear their uniforms, or at the very least, do not wear their belts. And this is not to say to restrict the expression of these people, but it is to make everyone feel comfortable and equal at all the tables.
Right. And in your very brief contact with the people in the police department in Hudson, did you have the chance to ask them whether they would be willing to put down their collars and their belts?
No, they really did not want to talk to us, it seemed. And even though they did offer us help and were like, oh, there's this other police officer you could talk to, it made it really difficult with the timings and stuff. So it seemed like they just didn't really want to have a conversation about this.
Right. At the end of the day, when people come together for a number of Saturdays, what sort of report or what sort of result would come out of this? Sam, this is a question for you, sorry.
I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time.
What sort of end result would you be aiming for?
So, I mean, of course, in a perfect scenario, the end result that we'd be looking for would be some sort of set number of proposals that the government could take seriously and consider, and perhaps make changes that work well for everyone involved in the situation, and specifically the people who have been historically negatively affected. But in a perhaps more realistic scenario, perhaps the least we can hope for is at least opening the community up to this conversation and maybe getting some sort of benefit from that, just kind of as a whole, and maybe set a precedent for future conversations about this topic and other topics related.
Minchi, imagine that this sort of process would take place, we're now just talking about an exercise, this is an assignment. Imagine if this would happen, how could you evaluate afterwards if things were done properly? How would you do the evaluation of such a process?
Oh, I think for evaluation, maybe we
Can you hold the mic a bit closer?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think for evaluation, we can like have a questionnaire for the participation, and which include the design team of the citizen assembly and also the experts of citizen assembly to evaluate how they think of the citizen assembly. Also, I think we can have time to let police and those participants talk about how this proposal could have conduct after they finish their citizen.
Do you think it could work? Would you be nervous if this were to happen for real? Would you be nervous about it?
Yeah, I'm kind of like,
Mike?
are the police willing to have a like conversation with the participation?
Yeah.
And I think that's the question.
Okay. Well, it's a question as well for Mayor Johnson, and can I ask him back to the floor and give, this is off-the-cuff feedback to what he just heard. You can remain there.
A little shorter. Yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me, that officers didn't want to meet with you. And it's mainly because they don't want to say something that's going to get written down and come back to haunt them, in the future. And this is, a sensitive topic. And when you've kind of worked and lived in a culture for so long, any type of change to that culture, seems like a threat. And I think you guys are on the perfect track, because one of the initiatives that I put out in my executive order was to have similar conversations with the community and the police, and to do that, a few times a year. And we have one of the first ones coming up. And we wanted to keep it small, the same way you guys did, because officers felt like, if there's too much of the community, they're going to be in front of a firing squad of, complaints. And, we didn't want that. So we also wanted to protect, the nature of, the officers' feelings, as well as the community, and people coming in and sharing their personal and vulnerable thoughts on policing and different issues. So I think you guys are definitely on the right track. It's kind of similar to the way that we're putting together our first event. And one of the things that was important about doing it this way was that we didn't want to just have like non-biased trainings, or trainings where you sit in front of a computer, click it for multiple choice for a half hour, and then all of a sudden you don't have a racist culture, you pass 80%. We wanted to really engage in people with the issues that are in front of them. I feel like if you know the population you're protecting, you take it more personal to protect them.
Before the students hand over their report to the mayor, are there any questions from the floor for the students or the mayor? You look all very convinced. There's one question from the gentleman at the back. Is the police force all male?
No, there's actually, I believe, 6 women out of the 26 officers. It makes a little bit of a difference, but the real issue is, the culture of the blue line. So if you're an officer that you don't agree with that culture, you're probably not gonna say much, because 25 or 24 of the other officers do agree. So you don't want to be, put set aside or treated differently in the force. And you also, especially for the, the women officers, you want to fit in. It's been harder for you to get to this point than it has a lot of the women. You're treated in public a lot different than the male officers. So, a lot of times they have to kind of fall in line to that blue line to survive as an officer.
I think we have to head on. I do apologize. I just invite Emily to hand over the report that you have been drafted with the four of you to Mayor Johnson. Maybe one day it might serve as a source of inspiration, but this was first and foremost an academic exercise. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much, Mayor Johnson. Thank you, students. Without further ado, we'll move to the second community, which is Redduck, nearby here, 11,000 inhabitants spread over 2 villages. And let us see whether Robert McKeon, the town supervisor, is there. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much, David, and apologies for not being with you in person this morning, or this afternoon rather. It seems only fitting that during a pandemic, the individual that can't be with you in person is the one who has an office 4 miles away. But I'm very happy to be with you remotely here from downtown Atlanta, as a matter of fact.
Robert, before becoming a town supervisor, I understood you had a career as an actor. Does that help?
Does it help? Well, sure, I guess it does. It helps in the sense that I have a lot of relationships, and how you behave as a representative is very important, and you really need to convey to individuals that you value their input. And so, yes, in a way, I mean, making sure that they feel comfortable and relating to me and vice versa is important.
What is the greatest joy of being a town supervisor?
Wow, the greatest joy is making people happy, and occasionally you can get things done, and maybe more than occasionally if you work hard with your community. There's an expression, all politics is local, and we value it because, a lot of the, behavior that you see in Washington and sometimes in state capitals, which seems to be 2 teams working to be at odds with each other, you don't really get that on the local level nowadays. You get mostly people pitching in and helping each other because they're also your neighbor, you know them. A community like Redduck, 11,000 people, I may have mentioned in the class a couple of weeks ago, I know half of them personally, individually, and so it's really enriching to go to the post office and see all of your constituents, but also all of your neighbors, and celebrate with them.
And what are the biggest frustrations of a town supervisor?
Very interesting. I would say probably maybe not the biggest frustration, but a pet peeve is that occasionally I see when people don't get what they want, I see sort of extraordinarily humorous behavior, let's put it that way. I'll give you an example. We had a very nice community solar project, which I think I mentioned in the class as well. And one of the neighbors who was nearby, who could maybe see some of those panels, didn't want it in that area, and started a campaign to try to tell folks that the panels would poison the drinking water underneath the ground. And so I would say my pet peeve is if you don't like something, that's fine. Tell us why, but do it in a way that's fair and honest and transparent.
Is there a lot of shouting going on when you do traditional participatory democracy, where people can have their say and it's more their shout?
You know, it's interesting. It used to be that way. I mean, it used to be a lot of, I think I mentioned I got started in this community because I became an advocate for preserving the open space and working farms. And so there was a lot of tension between those who were developing and those who owned land, who wanted to become developers. And so, yes, there was a lot of tension back then. There isn't so much anymore because
Is
sometimes,
Redduck the only community in the US that is depolarizing?
it could be. Although I have to say there are still those national issues, and obviously the pandemic and the mask mandates and the fake news and all of that kind of nonsense. We have people participating in that as well. So.
If you were to describe to an absolute foreigner the difference between the city of Hudson and the town of Redduck, how would you describe it?
Wow. I would say demographics. I mean, Hudson, you have very interesting demographics. You have much more of a contrast in Hudson. You have gentrification going on in Hudson, and you have more of a have and have-nots, I think, situation there. And Hudson is very urban. I think Redduck is sort of a compilation of suburban, agrarian, and a small town.
It's mostly haves, the few have-nots.
I'd say, we do have some income diversity, which is, nice. Our topic is housing affordability. And one of the things we spoke of is we have 5 trailer parks in our town, and we have Hudson River estates. And most of the folks are somewhere in between the two. And so we have lots of residential developments, but we also have lots of preserved farmland in between. So.
You mentioned affordable housing. You also pointed out to the pandemic. Have the two been related?
Absolutely. When everybody wanted to escape the urban environments because of the density that drove them there in the first place, they came to places like Redduck. And in this case, they had more than just a weekend to experience it. They started to fall in love with this community, which, amongst other things, has the wonderful Bard College inside of it, he says proudly. And, they decided, wow, it'd be great to live here, or I think I want to buy a house. And so housing prices were driven up in many cases by as much as 40%.
I read somewhere that about 250,000 of New Yorkers have decided to leave New York City. They flock partly to Redduck then.
They did. There's a Brooklyn migration. We also received folks from California as well. How many people leaving New York City yet to be decided, but at one point, David, just temporarily, at least 600,000 people had left during a portion of the pandemic.
If housing prices are going up, your haves are becoming even more haves. Why is this a controversial topic?
Well, why is it controversial? Because at the end of the day, it leads to housing insecurity, and we typically think of that more in urban environments, but it also is true in rural environments where you have generational families who have grown up here, who are volunteer firefighters, there are policemen, they are teachers. And if their children can't afford to live in the community that they were raised in, it poses a real problem.
Is there a growing tension between these rich newcomers and your, let's say, longtime residents?
Yes, and it is based upon the amount of money that they are throwing into the community, and oftentimes it's also what they want, which is interesting. There is some tension about, folks coming up from the city. I'm one of those people, by the way, in the 90s. And the concern that the people coming in want to, quote unquote, change the community that they came to know and love. Do they actually want to do that? That's up for debate. But yes, there are definitely tensions between newcomers and folks who have lived there for quite some time.
Well, Robert, this is exactly the topic students have been working on, these growing tensions, given this new reality. And at this point, I would like to invite the students who have been working on Redduck to the floor. And we'll get back to you, Robert. Please stay with us, and we'll get back to you for some feedback after they have presented their ideas.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Welcome, Benicio, Luca, and Monica. You've been working, Monica, you are from Hudson, but you choose to work on Redduck.
True.
What did you hope to achieve when you started to think like, this is something interesting to work on?
Couple things. One, I am from Hudson and I'm involved in a lot in Hudson, so I knew I would have more than ample opportunity to return to you know, the mayor is working really hard, but he hasn't quite wrapped everything up, so there's still definitely going to be initiatives to get involved in there. And one of the things I'm very engaged in, vis-a-vis an issue we're dealing with in Hudson, but also something I know familiar from growing up, is the question of affordable housing and housing scarcity.
Right.
I grew up in federally subsidized housing. I know what it's like to struggle for rent and what it's like to be displaced in the community you grew up in because you can't afford to live there anymore. So as the whole Hudson Valley is being impacted on it, and when Robert brought that up as an issue that was happening here, it felt very compelling to me.
A local citizens' assembly can be an interesting tool to bring a divided community together. I've seen this in Belgium, we've seen this in Northern Ireland. We spoke about this in the Hudson case. At the same time, with a new topic like newcomers moving into a community like Redduck, there's always the danger that the question that forms the starting point of a citizens' assembly is not perceived as being neutral. It's a bit like in a referendum. A lot depends on the phrasing. What is the sort of remit? What sort of question would you be handing over to citizens participating in such a citizens' assembly?
So the more that we thought about it and looked at it and also spoke with Robert about it, we realized that it's really at a beginning stage, and the question is, what are the housing needs of the community? Not it is this or it is that, but actually what are they, an open-ended inquiry. And then how as a community do we seek to address the needs of the community and meet the needs of the community. So we weren't setting out with a predefined answer or, you know, a niche for it to land in, but rather an open-ended inquiry for the community to start to engage.
In Hudson, we're talking about an old problem. Tensions between police, law enforcement on the one hand, and citizens are known. Here we're talking about a rather new topic, a new reality, apart from the fact that Robert moved in already in the 1990s, but the real problem became acute over the last year and a half. Does that impact the sort of outcome you are designing for? Designing for impact was a term used in a previous session this morning. How do you design for impact on such a new topic?
One of the things that I have found so compelling in this whole conversation of the possibility of sortition and citizens' assemblies is that it can be used as a really powerful tool for conflict resolution or finding where there's room for middle ground compromise, where people are willing to move through the process of deliberative democracy. However, it's also a great tool to head something off before it becomes a really divisive issue.
Yes.
It's a great tool to begin to open a conversation so that you can be proactive at managing it in a way that really works for a community, as opposed to having to do crisis management from the other end.
It's like taking a fire insurance before the house is burning. Benicio, how would it look like? I mean, how many people are we talking about? How long would they be seeing each other? What does the model look like, the one you've designed?
Okay, this is working, cool. We designed a relatively intimate group of people, around 30 to 40 citizens drawn by lot. We considered primarily economic status and housing status, because the question is not necessarily require going down ethnic lines completely.
So which criterions would you be using when you're drafting your random sample?
Renters versus people who own houses. Given the housing crunch that's happening in Redduck slowly but surely, more renters will be coming in, and those people need to be asked what they want their lives to look like. And generally, we tried to pick a group of people who are representative of their community by profession, by housing, because we want them to construct a vision.
Right. You have established residents, you have newcomers, you also have weekenders, people who have a weekend house. Should they be part of that conversation?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How would you do that? Because they're not on any list. How would you get to them?
We would send letters primarily. We'd use the mailing address that exists at the moment.
Right.
Bringing in newcomers is a particularly difficult issue that we don't really have an answer to, because they aren't in the community yet.
Right.
And you can't really identify who they are. But you can ask the people who are there, who are likely most scared, who are the most likely to be displaced, what they want their lives to look at and the way they believe their community should change. And that's perhaps the most important. I think what will come out of that is not saying that they don't want any newcomers, because Robert McKeon said he was a newcomer. There's not an insignificant number of people in Redduck who were newcomers. So you can bring people from that perspective who have experience in the past, and together construct a vision for the future.
So you're not working in terms towards some precise policy proposals, but rather like developing a vision of what this community needs and what it wants. When talking about citizens' assemblies, and it was discussed yesterday as well by Roger, is the role of experts and who picks them and what is their input. Luca, what sort of experts would you be calling for in the context of a citizens' assembly in Redduck? Everybody knows about his house. Do you need any experts there?
Well, I think it's an interesting question with the notion of an expert. I mean, I think if you're coming at it at an angle that really our proposal here is a proposal for a proposal, and it's almost a pre-citizens assembly to, as Monica said, kind of broach the topic and approach it kind of early stage. However, people, I think, who, the 30 to 40 people that want to come and choose to be part of it, I think citizens assembly comes with a responsibility, and that responsibility is to have complete, transparent, and kind of comprehensive information for all the participants. And so I think, the kinds of experts, there are, in the issue of housing, there's the notion of affordable housing, and you can have experts that kind of from the national level come at that. You can have experts that are, are in conversation with that on the local level as well. And I think people want a vast array of experts. So I guess I can't say who or what it would be, but I also think that also turning that over to the supervisor and the policymakers in towns, in these communities, in these municipalities, to kind of reach into their references and find experts that they know that the community can relate to. Yeah. I think is an important thing.
If you create a random sample, you will end up with one or a couple of people coming from one of the 5 trailer parks who are perhaps unhappy about these prices going up. But restaurant owners in downtown Tivoli or downtown Redduck, they're quite happy with all this new big money coming in. What's the biggest danger there? I mean, if you're designing for this, you hope for the best, but what do you fear, Monica?
It's interesting that you asked me about restaurant owners.
Exactly. She has a restaurant.
And I think it's unfair to paint all restaurant owners with the same brush. Okay. No, I wouldn't generalize, because how people feel about how their community evolve, it differs for varying reasons. But that said, the thing that struck me as so compelling about this model, this is the first day that we met with you and you did an exercise. You asked us, I think, how we felt about how important democracy was in general. And it was, you know, 1 to 10, and you wrote down where we stood. And then you asked us how well we thought it was working, and those responses were very different. And from there, you then just asked us, okay, you were 3. What would it take to take your 3 to a 4? What would it take to take your 7 to an 8? And it was it's such a simple thing, but it kind of was a light going off for me, because it was like, especially now in this political climate, so many of our views are so entrenched, they're immovable. And it was like bringing just a little bit of lubricant, a little WD-40 to just slightly loosen up the wrench a little bit. And when you can open up just a little, there's some room for conversation. There's some room to engage. When it's like this, there's no listening, there's no dialogue. So the process of this and bringing together people who may walk into the room with very different perspectives, even if they leave with very different perspectives, there's now room for a dialogue that didn't exist beforehand. And out of that, there's something possible. So that's for me where the value is.
Robert, Redduck risks to become the most pacified place in North America. But before we go to your feedback, I would love to ask if there are any questions from the room on what's been going on or what has been proposed as an exercise for Redduck. Yes, please. There's a question of the gentleman at the back. Can you wait until you get a microphone?
Hi, Emilio Rojas, faculty here at Bard. I'm not sorry for bringing this up, but thinking about police and surveillance of the exits of the Bard campus, and especially as a faculty of color, I get stopped at least once a month by police, and they stop right in front of all of the entrances, and usually will have a direct contact. So and the fact that I'm a person of color, none of my white faculty gets stopped with that much frequency. So I'm wondering what type of training does the police have in terms of bias and anti-racist training?
And you're talking now about the Redduck Police Department.
Redduck Police specifically.
It's a bit unrelated to the housing question, but I'm sure the town supervisor would be willing to answer. Let us see whether there are any other questions. Yes, please. The gentleman at the back.
Hi, my name is Dominic, and I'm from New Orleans.
Can you hold the microphone close to your mouth,
Sorry.
please?
Hi, my name is Dominic, and I'm from New Orleans. And I just want to ask a question that's kind of related to the housing issue that you're having here in Redduck. And given the tendency for outsiders moving to Texas for new opportunities, what would you do to build a better community between Texans and outsiders? Especially knowing how Californians tend to move to Texas, what do you believe it takes to bond people from two very different states together? What lessons would you use from your research here in New York?
So even before it has happened in Redduck, there are questions about how to do this in California. Does anybody want to react to that?
Well, I'm from California. So wait, so the question, sorry, I'm just one more time. It's like the question is how to kind of create a citizens assembly in California where these issues are also prevalent?
No, in Texas. Like, how would you build a better community between Texans and Californians? Because I know there's like a lot of tension between the two.
Oh, well, I'm not sure, frankly. I mean, both big states, but I don't know if I can answer how to build a better relationship with Texans and Californians. Yeah, that stumps me.
Thank you.
I'll take a quick stab if you don't mind.
Please.
I mean, just going back to what I was saying before, I think that this model for interaction is a great vehicle to bring out the issues that are of concern and create the shift from just tension against to actually an opening for a conversation. And then there becomes an opportunity to build bridges and find out where there is room to move and compromise. But without having some way to facilitate that conversation and begin to open things up, there's no possibility. So one of the reasons I'm so enthralled with this idea, and like all other things, it is far from perfect and shouldn't need to be perfect, is because it does represent that opening for a conversation that doesn't exist right now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert, I would like to go back to you. And at the same time, I should add that one of the students is not there because she had another assignment. This is Anna. And I remember there was an interesting discussion between Anna and Robert when you came to class. Robert, I remember you didn't want to have these big chain stores coming to Redduck, and we talked about Beer World, and she had been there, and it gave quite a lively discussion. But without further ado, can you give us some of the feedback on what you have heard on this topic and on this proposal?
On Beer World in particular, or on formula businesses, chain stores and chain restaurants? I would say both together. Lots of support for prohibiting these types of businesses in a community because you lose your identity. And, you know, if a community loses its identity, it's as if a family member has as well. They start to lose their way. And so there's nothing unique about, you know, I occasionally go vacation in Florida, and if you're familiar with many places in Florida, one intersection looks just like the other intersection. And so you don't even know really where you are half the time. I won't go into all the economic stuff, but it's really all about community character.
As to the proposal, Robert, how do you relate to it when you hear what the students have been preparing?
Well, it's spot on, as you might say. You have to listen first and try to understand. The challenge, however, with this topic is that if you're trying to address a known demand, which is, you know, your generational families and how can they stay in their own community, that's one thing. You know who to reach out to, and then you can talk to your, you know, important players, your developers, and so on and so forth, your municipality on what type of public-private partnership programs they will institute in order to accomplish the goal. But then there's the whole other host of individuals, and why housing affordability, I think, is so important as a topic is because, and important to the subject matter of your conference today, it's about revitalizing democracy. Well, you are not going to be participating or empowered in democracy if you are housing insecure. If you don't even know where you call home, how can you participate in that community? It becomes incredibly challenging, and you, by virtue of not knowing where to hang your hat, you know, possess less abilities and less skills. So we have to solve this issue so that people can start to grow roots in a community and then, you know, start to become empowered by working with the people in their community to make the changes that we need in all of these areas.
Robert, the student, you're not here, but the students will make sure you get a copy of the proposal, the design they have been working on. Thank you very, very much for your feedback. For your time and for sharing your insights into your community. Thank you very much, and thank you for the students as well.
Thank you, Dick.
Thank you. And then thirdly, we move over to Pine Plains. I had the good fortune to visit the good folk of Pine Plains earlier this week, and I'm very happy to call to the floor Darrah Cloud, who is the town supervisor. Welcome, Darrah. Good afternoon.
Hi.
You've all had previously interesting lives, or your previous lives were interesting before you became a politician, an activist, an actor. You started off as a
playwright.
Does that help?
Yes. I highly recommend government for anyone in the theater.
Why is that?
I thought it was obvious, but actually, it gives you a lot of bizarre skills you didn't expect.
Such as?
One is your love of systems. So, one of the things that we talked about in our class was we're trying to build a central septic system for the town. And one of the ways I studied that was to go to every small town in the Catskills that had a new system and study it. So I got to go see how waste is processed in Lexington and Prattville and a couple other places, and Hillsdale.
What's the link with Shakespeare?
Pardon?
What's the link with theater and Shakespeare? I mean, the fact of going to visit these small towns
Well, the point
and their
is,
septic system?
yeah, the point, the point is that lighting and stage set, these are all kinds of technical systems.
Okay, good.
Even a play is, in a way, a technical system. It's a system of Aristotelian structure. And it's strange, but the training really works for looking at these things and figuring out whether you can handle it or not.
If you're a playwright, is empathy an important thing?
Well, empathy is what you write from. You have to have empathy with the characters you invent or the people you're kind of using in order to imitate them in your plays. So, yes.
And as a politician?
I hope so. Yeah, empathy is as much of in a way, a problem. If you're too empathetic, it's hard to see how to get out of it.
Huh.
But it's essential I think, for governing well.
From empathy to excrements, how come you had to install a new sewage system or a first sewage system? How did that come about?
Well, speaking of democracy and equity, we've gotten into a situation in all the rural towns in New York with the Department of Health. In order to make sure that water is clean, many of the systems in homes either need to be replaced or exist. In businesses, they changed the law so that you must have a certain amount of land extra beyond what you have for your septic system in order to open with an adequate ability to have enough people in your business.
You told me when we were in Pine Plains, you told me about a restaurant which was built on a very small plot of land.
Right.
So their septic system cannot be very big, and for that reason they can only host 12 clients, customers at the same time.
Yeah, in a restaurant. It's devastating. So we had a couple come, they renovated the whole place. It was super cute. Oaxacan restaurant, and when they went to the health department to get their permit, they were told, oh, you've got to rip it all out. You can only have 12 seats because your system is not adequate.
So they are the ones who are happy when a centralized sewage system is being installed.
It means that anybody who is not wealthy can open a business in Pine Plains and have enough clientele to be successful and also to expand.
So you have to be successful to be more successful.
Yes.
Because you have to make a big investment in terms of your sanitation.
Yeah.
And your community is, in terms of surface, quite big. But the septic system you are going to install is rather small, right? How many households are being served by it?
32.
32. We went there. It's basically the main road, the one intersection, the one traffic light.
Yep.
It has a traffic light. And so the traffic light will be surrounded by a system of sewage. Why is that a problem? Why does it create tension in your community?
Well,
do other people want to have it as well? Do farms want to have it as well?
No, because we are blessed in Pine Plains with a gravel base that works very well to filter the water and the waste. And so most people have an adequate septic system that they actually hardly ever have to maintain. I don't necessarily trust that, but that's what they believe. And
what they have is good enough.
That what they have is good enough. They don't want to spend the money for operation and maintenance,
all right,
which they would be charged every year.
How much would that have been? Now they're excluded. It's only the downtown that is getting its system.
Yes, and we'll start there.
You'll start there. There's an idea you might expand the system.
That's the hope.
And how much people who are connected to the system, how much will they have to pay every year?
It'll cost them about $1,100 a year, but most of those are businesses.
But they don't have to pay for the construction.
No.
They have to pay for the maintenance.
Correct. Well, the hope is that I could find the funding for it, and that's on me.
In order to connect 32 households to a sewage system, what sort of budget are we thinking about?
Between $4 and $5 million.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
For 32 toilets, basically.
Yes, exactly.
And so the rest of the community thinks like this is way too expensive. We don't want to pay the maintenance fee on an annual basis. We're quite happy enough with what we have in our backyard.
Correct.
Right. Okay, this is a starting point. There's one more thing. You have to install this. The Department of Health has been asking this. What's the last hurdle? We're just talking about Redduck, which is an early stage problem. This is like a almost final stage problem. What's the last hurdle you are facing as a town supervisor?
Well, we have to get the district formed, and we have to get the people who want this system on board. The hope is that they can petition us, actually, for the system, which would be the cheapest and easiest way for us to approve it, and then I go out and try to get the funding.
And then you need 32 signatures of those involved, or
Yeah, I need
half of it, or?
Yeah, a majority.
All right. And what is the, if they don't petition you, what's the alternative?
We don't have an alternative. If they don't want it,
They don't want
we
it.
don't build it.
And might there be a referendum within the community then?
Pardon?
Might there be a referendum?
There would be a referendum only if we can't get a petition going.
All right. And why don't you do that?
We're hoping to do it at least, I'm thinking, beginning of next year.
A referendum. Is it expensive?
Yes.
You're losing money if you hold a referendum.
Yeah, it would be much cheaper for the town if these businesses petitioned us.
And could a referendum, you might get one answer, but also two communities. Might it be a divisive topic?
The district, the only people who can vote in the referendum are the same people who could petition.
The 32?
It's only a district that can vote.
So a petition would be much cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the starting point. This is what the students started working with. Let's have a look at what they have been assigning. And I think, Darrah, you can stay because there's only 3 of them as well. Can I ask the 3 students to come over here? Thank you.
I have to say that when they came to visit us in Pine Plains, they got to meet a lot of our police force.
That's true. They spent quite a long time talking to the police force.
Yeah, we only have 4.
So, welcome. You don't have to keep your mask on, but if you want, it's absolutely fine. So what Darrah is saying, whatever we do, it's only the 32 households concerned. Whether we do a petition or a referendum, it's only about these 32 businesses, mostly businesses in downtown Pine Plains. If you would be doing a citizens' assembly, would you do it just for the 32 households, or would you include the other 2,400 inhabitants of Pine Plains? Dawson, how do you feel about who should be involved?
We would definitely do a combination of both the surrounding community as well as the, we'd have to make sure that these 32 people or households, properties are represented within the Citizens Assembly.
Why is that?
Because they have very strong interests in the actual outcome of the situation.
Right. And how about including other people, the ones who are perfectly happy with their septic tank in the backyard under their maple tree? Why include these? Because it's their community, or?
Exactly, their community, and they're going to feel the effects as well, so that perhaps the property taxes will go up. Because if there's a sewer or septic system, or sewer system, what am I saying?
Right.
Then that will incentivize more businesses to open up more and drive the economics of the town up so that more people will want to buy that property. And
right. Do you think including people who are not concerned at this stage might make them more enthusiastic about joining the sewage system, perhaps in a later stage? I mean, Darrah was just talking about expanding from the first phase.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
So the question is, if you, in this stage, in a citizens' assembly, if you would include residents who are not living downtown, who are not concerned, who do not belong to the 32 households, would it change their opinion about joining a sewage system or not?
Well, that's the hope, that they would see different perspectives than the ones that they're ingrained in.
Right. Are there, the ones not involved right now, Darrah, are they against it at this stage?
It depends on their, it depends on their economic status, I would say. I think a lot of people in town are worried about their taxes going up. Very worried. A lot of them are seniors who can't take one more dollar out of their Social Security to pay for anything. So that is a real concern.
And they think you will do with your
They
sewage.
think that, well, what will happen, they think, is that their houses will become more valuable because we have this system. And they're correct.
Right.
However, we will also be able to build more housing, which would lower our taxes.
Is there a bit of a Republican-Democratic divide on the septic system in Pine Plains?
No, I would call it an economic divide.
It's an economic divide. Yeah. Okay. Ivan, what sort of duration and what sort of space would you be using for a citizens' assembly in the town of Pine Plains?
In terms of like the amount of time?
How long would you put people together?
We were thinking like a 5-week or like 5 separate meetings, maybe over the course of like 10 weeks, just so that like once a week is a big commitment, so we thought like once every other week might work.
And what sort of remit, what sort of question would you give to the participants? What would be the starting question? Perhaps you have it in front of you, Vincent.
You mean the question?
The question, indeed.
Let me see. So the key question is, our community has been developing plan for a central septic system. What do you think should be done to develop our community?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a key question.
Why is this? Why did you pick that question?
Well, because it's related to the topic, and also it's a very neutral question.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's open-ended. When you organize citizens' assemblies, especially bigger ones or ones on a sensitive topic, they often have a chair, somebody presiding it. Is this something you would recommend for the Pine Plains session? Ivan, how do you feel about it? Or, sorry, Vincent.
Yes, we do. So we were talking about the possible candidate of the chair.
Could Darrah be an appropriate chair?
No. So it can be politician.
Right.
So it can be like high school principal, librarian, the
librarian.
A librarian and a therapist.
And a therapist, even?
Yeah.
Huh. Darrah, is there a highly respected psychotherapist in the community who might preside over?
You know, there are a few social workers who've probably saved a few lives, and I think that's a great idea.
Right. And what sort of place would you be picking for that sort of gathering? Should it be the town hall?
Well, we decided to hold the CA in the library, on the second floor.
Right.
Yeah.
And why was that an appropriate space? What sort of conditions should be met by a place in order to be useful?
Well, I think the important requirement is that place can hold enough people to hold that citizen assembly.
Right.
Yeah, so, and we noticed that library can hold like around 100 people, right? So it's enough big space, and also it's a public space, so, yeah.
And do you think participants should be paid for their time? I mean, we're talking about a considerable amount of time. It's a pretty technical topic as well. Do you think they should get some money for their time?
Yeah, I think we said like $50.
For the whole range, or for per day, or?
Per day.
Yeah, per day.
Per day.
Is that stretching the local budget too far?
Well, given that you have to budget a year in advance, yeah. But there's also grants that I might be able to get that are on a revolving basis every quarter.
Right. In a previous group, we were talking about experts. How about facilitators? Should people just talk among themselves, or should there be somebody accompanying them, another psychotherapist? Dawson, how do you feel about facilitation?
Of course, there should be facilitators. It wouldn't be a very productive assembly if there weren't, because people would just not talk or fight, right? So we need somebody to moderate and make sure that people are expressing their ideas and opinions so that maybe we can come to better conclusions. And that facilitator would most definitely have to be some third party that doesn't have any incentives.
Any vested interest?
Yeah, vested interest.
And should it be somebody from the community, or should it rather be an outsider? I remember Darrah saying there's a strong sense of identity in Pine Plains. Should a facilitator come from outside or from inside?
Well, that's a tough question, because it needs to, the people need to be trusted. And if the community doesn't trust too much outside of the community, then they should be part of the community. But they also have to be unbiased. They have to have no vested interest, right? So it's difficult to answer.
Thank you. Before we get back to Darrah and ask her reply, her response on what she heard, are there any questions from the floor about everything you always wanted to ask about sewage systems? Centralized septic systems? Please, Margot.
So I just wondered, have you already, the plan for the septic system is already decided upon? That is not on the floor. Is that correct? Because there are different kinds of septic systems you could choose, of course.
There are. We actually got a grant to do a sewer feasibility study. And so that is completed now, and it does include 3 different designs of different cost.
And would that be part of the citizens' assembly to decide upon between the 3 different plans?
Oh, I think it would have to be, don't you, Dawson?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. As you said, Margot, this is indeed a decision-making process. If you go from mile 0 to mile 100, I think we're all close to mile 90. We're pretty far down the road. And so it was interesting in this context to have a look at what can a citizens' assembly do when the plans are already on the table, but communities seem to be divided. Darrah, can you give some feedback on what you heard, and do you think this was an interesting academic exercise?
Oh, I just think this is one of the best things I've participated in a long time. I'm so excited by it. I not only will attempt to use what you recommend right away, I might have to, change a little bit of the timeline, but I'm really excited about using it for something that was brought up in both the other sessions, or the other people, was this rift between weekenders and what we would call townspeople, which is becoming even worse day by day. And I think we could convene almost a standing citizen assembly around bringing people from all the walks of life in our town, which is really small, and that's what makes it really doable, to an assembly that takes place maybe once a month. And now the weekenders are often they don't even come up in the winter.
Hang on, you're saying you're actually going to do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's such an opportunity, because if you think about it, the only way for this kind of a rift, which is decades old, is to get together. And this gives us a structure.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, Paris became the second place on earth having a permanent citizens' assembly after the German-speaking part of Belgium. And less than 24 hours later, there is a number 3, and it's Pine Plains.
I just have to convince my board.
You just have to convince your board.
I can do that.
Are there any questions for Darrah, the students? Please, lady over there, Lady Viscusi.
I know we don't have the people who took part in the first 2 panels here, but in general, maybe the students could answer.
I don't hear you very well.
Could the students answer? We don't have everybody here, but maybe the students are able to answer this. Did they feel awkward going into these communities? They, after all, are outsiders. They're young. If there's any town gown problem, they're from the gown.
All right.
And did they feel any hostility, or were they warmly welcomed? And I'm sorry, your classmates can't take part.
Okay, students, how was it for you to go and travel to these remote places? Sure, Dawson.
Well, I gotta say, I feel awkward 99% of the time, but I felt very warmly welcomed to Pine Plains when I showed up, and I mean, just coming to the town hall, and I was early, so that I was first one walking in, and just got very warm feeling coming from inside, and I got to sit down and start collecting my notes, and it's just a really nice place, I gotta say. Yeah,
I think
not very awkward.
What might have been a bit awkward was that this was just an exercise. So you're stealing people's time, functional time, to do something that is an academic exercise. That's at least how I felt when I was inviting these town supervisors and mayors in. But to my surprise, some of them came back to the course, and Darrah, she was invited for one of the sessions, and she came 3 times and almost turned into one of the students. So that was quite wonderful. But perhaps some of the other students want to react on the question, like, how was it for you to go into one of these communities? Anyone else want to respond to that? Okay, any other question? Or shall we end on this happy note about feeling awkward most of the time, but sometimes happy despite all this? There's one question from Tara.
For the town supervisor, I'm just curious, are there already town meetings, and would the assemblies be kind of in addition to, or how would you communicate to your constituents that this was something different?
Well, there are 2 town meetings a month that everyone's invited to, and rarely do we get very many who come. But the internet has opened up participation because I learned Zoom right away for the pandemic. So I would get the word out at meetings. I also started a newsletter that's a weekly newsletter. And I inform people about what's going on in town because we don't have a newspaper. So we can easily, I think, get the word out. And then we go around on foot and put posters everywhere.
Interesting. I think before Roger says some concluding remarks, is he still around? Or is this indeed, Roger, you're there. You're going to wrap this up. Before we finish, I would like to thank the 3 politicians, the local politicians, Major Kamal Johnson, Town Supervisor Robert McKeon, and Town Supervisor Darrah Cloud, not only for being here today, but for their time and for the generosity with which they have shared their insights. We'd like to thank the students as well, because I think I learned more from them than they learned from me, and I would like to thank you for your attention and for being here. Thank you so very much. And before I forget, you can hand over your copy to Darrah, because she's going to use this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, David, for being here for a month. It's been great. I got to sit in on the class he taught with the students. Thanks, Darrah, for starting a permanent citizen assembly in Pine Plains, which I'm hoping that in some sense we can get some students to be helpful with and help organize. Thanks to you for being here. This has been an amazing 2 days. I think a lot to digest. The citizen assembly movement, you know, we often say at the Arden Center we're a humanities center to do politics and a politics center that doesn't do policy. And we don't really have a policy thing. And yet this movement, the energy around citizen assemblies is pretty extraordinary. And it's exactly as I tried to express, and I think a lot of people try to express, very much in the Arendtian spirit of what does it mean to act and act with power and seek power in politics through acting together, not necessarily through pursuing interests, but through acting together, talking to each other and finding common grounds. And that's what this process is really about. I'm thrilled for those of you who are here, who joined us for 2 days amidst the pandemic at Bard. I want to thank a lot of people. I will do it quickly. She's been mentioned, but Tina Stanton, who's been at the RN Center now for about 8 or 9, 10 years. I can never remember even. She's deeply woven into the fabric of the RN Center. She's now the executive director. She's amazing at what she does. And these conferences could not happen without her. And I want to thank her for her continued work. We have 2 newer employees at the RN Center who really contributed a lot. Jacob Rivers, who works with the OSUN, Hannah Arendt Humanities Network, and just hired 2 weeks ago and put in yeoman's work, Phil Lindsay. So thank you guys for incredible work during this conference. And then all the student workers who've been manning the tables, running the mics around, helping out, get your packages ready, get you checked in. Thank you to the students. The RN Center has an amazing student community, and we really value them and couldn't operate without them. And then just the Bard staff and community. Jake did the AV, Total Webcasting for a great webcast. Really appreciate all this help. Really hope next year we have no pandemic and we're all able to be here, both those who are here and those who are watching. It's been a pleasure. We need to go, because those of you who are going to see the Gauntlet, which is the theater performance, which starts over at Fisher Center, and Parliament of Reality starts at 5:30 sharp. So you need to get there. If you're a speaker or you need to, there's a bus that will take some people out there. It's about a 10-minute walk for those who want to walk over. It's an amazing, I've been following the production of it very closely. It's actually made by interviewing people involved with the conference and at the RN Center and at Bard around these questions, and I think you're going to enjoy it incredibly. So thank you very much. There's a point in the back. Oh, we sent out a post-conference survey, and I hope you'd fill it out. It would help a lot. Thank you very much. I don't know. I do have, I have to see how many tickets, I have to see how many, just talk to me afterwards and I'll see. I don't know if it's sold out for all 3 performances. The one tonight is sold out, but I may have 1 or 2 extras. So if there are people who don't have tickets and want to go with us, I can probably be helpful, but that's limited. I see you, Emilio. I got you. Anyone else? Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to see you next year.